give it a second. All right, it's live. So if y'all want, y'all can use my account. I've got extra seats,
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
so you can
It's
play
kind
with
of
it.
you.
I think I've got up to 4 or 8 seats or something. I gave Cosmo one. So
Nice.
let me introduce y'all a little. I'll do a terrible introduction, and y'all can correct me. But this is Deanna and Joel. They are down in El Salvador, are actually still educators, but they were in the United States as educators, and now they've moved down to the great country of El Salvador for the purpose of getting close, I think, closest to the Bitcoin signal, and living an awesome life in a beautiful country. And they just finished editing and writing and publishing a book. And so they get to tell us about that. Plus, they are the hosts of 2 of our hosts on the Bitcoin Daily. They host the Wednesday show and are great contributors to several of the shows. And so I wanted to interview them so they could tell us more about their book and just their background and how they got to where they are. And I don't even know if we'll have enough time to get to everything, so we may have to do this again. But
Part 2.
how are y'all doing today?
I'm doing
Great.
well. Yeah.
Another lovely day here in El Salvador.
Yes. It's about usually between 85 and 95 year round. So but the
Wow.
sun is out and we're in rainy season, so it can be pretty gloomy.
So it's officially a tropical nation.
We are in a tropical nation, and we have all of the insects and critters that go along with it.
That's fantastic. I bet you have all the great fruits too.
Yeah, it's mango season, so it's towards the end of mango season. So now it's like we just have rotting mangoes everywhere around us.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, because they're so high up in the tree, you can't get them, and then they just fall and they split, and then
Yeah, but we like to say that the scent of mangoes wafts through the air and make it sound more romantic than it actually is.
yeah.
Yes, I love it. I love it. So how is the expat community there? Y'all are part of it.
Yeah, it's
tell us a little bit about that.
so I've lived in cities a great deal of my, at least since I was little. I was raised in a really small town in Northern California in the agricultural region. And since about 4th grade, I've primarily lived in cities. There's been a few stints that it wasn't. And so, in American cities, they can be, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco. It's not always the most neighborly places. You just don't always get to know people. But down here, it is the most neighborly, kind expat community. I mean, the expat community is just so amazing. In fact, once a month, we have what we call family dinner. And we have our expat family come, and I make a big dinner. Or Joel and I make a big dinner.
Yeah, and our last culinary theme was New Orleans. So you might appreciate that, Craig.
No way. What did y'all cook? That's my city.
Yeah, I made a shrimp etouffee, and Deanna made jambalaya.
I made a Cajun bread pudding,
Boudin
praline
balls.
boudin balls, and it was great. We had a lot of fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
all those are great. Those are all great dishes. I've learned to cook those since I was a kid. I was explaining to Tatum, or me and Tatum were going back and forth. He stayed in New Orleans for about 4 years, about how the cooking culture here in Louisiana, and that oddly enough, usually it's the men for the big events that do a lot of the cooking, and the women will do like the preparing of the home and sometimes the entertaining of the guests and the desserts, but the men get around the big dishes and the big pots and just make it an all-day affair, and it's kind of what they do. And it was shocking that was not. I thought all men did that, but apparently it's just Louisiana.
I think it's definitely a cultural thing of who predominantly who does the cooking. And I love Cajun culture. I did archaeology for years, and if I hadn't done Egyptology, I would have done Creole archaeology. Wow. I just love the culture. I love the history. I think it's fascinating. I think it's interesting to study history, and I have a background in history and anthropology. But when cultures kind of come together, that's when things get really fun to look at and to understand how, like, what gets preserved, what kind of gets changed, what ideas get diffused between the two, and just that meshing of stuff. I love that. So, in fact, in Egypt, I was a Greco-Roman Egyptologist. So it was all about the meshing of the cultures. And then when Christianity came in, was actually what my specialty was early Christianity in Egypt specifically. And it's just so interesting when like ideas collide. So.
Right.
And a lot of people in the Bitcoin space that know you personally, Deanna, don't know that you have this background in anthropology, and they may know that you have it in background in history too. But I bet that informed the way you wrote the book too.
Are you hosting, Joel, out of habit?
Isn't that funny? Isn't that how that always happens?
It does every time, even when we're having conversations with our friends. He's like, and he goes into host mode. It's really funny.
We can't help ourselves.
I know.
By the way,
I'm always looking for a segue.
Every time Joel comes onto my show and ends up the host, he apologizes, and I'm like, "No, thank you so much." Every time, hop on.
I know. And I've been really busy with some projects. I'm working with Bitcoin Beach right now on writing some curriculum and doing some research with circular economies. And so Joel will come in. So I haven't been able to listen to the shows like I like to, and he'll come in and like, "Yeah, I hosted again." It's like, "Yeah, I could see that."
I love it. I love it. So you said you studied Egyptian culture,
Yeah.
or
So
the
I guess I can do an introduction. I'm an educator. I've been an educator for a long time. I taught college in Los Angeles, and I taught history, humanities, and anthropology. I have a master's in both history and anthropology and a doctorate in education. So those are kind of my credentials. And for anthropology, I studied all branches, but I really focused my research on archaeology. I did archaeology in California and California deserts, but then my specialization was in Roman Egypt, specifically the Coptic culture, which is the Egyptian Christian culture, in, say, the 1st through 5th centuries. So that's if you want to drill down. And I dug up mummies, and I was a textile person. So I studied and analyzed the textiles and the iconography on the textiles and how they changed from the traditional Pharaonic into the Greek, into the Roman, and then into the Coptic tradition. So the transitions from burial practices, that was my master's thesis in Egypt.
How long you actually went to Egypt?
Yeah, I dug there for years. It was on a dig that was associated with UC Berkeley. And I was at Cal State University in Bakersfield, and we had a collaboration. My mentor at the time, he also was on the dig. He was an osteologist, so he was a bone expert. So I was on Team Mummy, and we dug up mummies and analyzed them. It was amazing.
Fantastic. How long were you there for?
I think I went 4 years in 2000s. That's when I was there, and
not 4 years straight, though.
No. But for each year, I mean, we were all academics, so we would dig in the summer, which Egypt in the summer is very hot. So if it was 120 by noon, we would call it a day. That was the threshold.
Wow.
And it was like, it's a dry heat. And I'm like, no, but it's still hot.
And how is modern Egypt? Or what part of it is that by any major city where you were?
Yeah, so we were 130 miles or so south of Cairo in what we call Middle Egypt. It was a very rural community. So when I moved here to El Salvador, it was a really easy transition because I had lived in a very rural area in a third world country, and I just thought it was beautiful. The people were beautiful. You don't know entrepreneurs until you've been to a third world country, and people are hustling to make a living because they have pride and they have this desire to have value in their lives, something that I think is really gone from America.
But also no safety net.
Yeah, there is no safety net. You can't just go down and, collect a check from the government in these places. You've got to hustle. And I think it's beautiful to drive down the road and see people selling coconuts or roasting corn down on the corner in Egypt, or setting up a stall to sell scarves because it's a Muslim country in Egypt and everybody wears a hijab. And I had beautiful scarves that I would get every year in Egypt. And, in the West, we wear them very differently, but it was just amazing. And I see that same thing down here in El Salvador, that there's just the spirit of goodness and wanting to do something valuable with your life, no matter what level of, society you're in.
Yeah.
And people forget that that El Salvador has been in a war zone for decades. So the infrastructure is not non-existent. They're rebuilding right now, and it's like any country that has come out of war on their own soil. So, so there's a lot of services that we get used to in the West that aren't here, or if they are here, they're unreliable. But they're building it, and the thing that has really rocketed the country in terms of their culture and ambition is after shutting the gangs down and eradicating violent crime, then that allows people to think about the future and to know that they can strive and achieve and work and gain value and save it and be able to keep it without looking over their shoulder and thinking that the gang is just going to take it. Those are gone now. So imagine, somebody put this to me, imagine having um, a security cost of your country that is worth, let's say, a quarter to, a third of your GDP. Take that off, and what's going to happen to the culture? And that's where we are right now.
Yeah. Not to mention, when you're in this fight or flight mode, it's not a very creative position to be in. You definitely don't have a long vision. It's more of a short term survive day to day versus sit down and think deeply about something you can build that might take 5 or 6 or 10 or even a decade to build. That comes from a position of security and strength.
And it
So,
changes the nature of how you interact with people. You can look at other people as a threat, and if so, that changes your level of trust, your ability to interact on a level playing field, and your belief that you are both value creating individuals who have something in common that they can trade. That was the case, and it's not entirely gone because there are still people here, obviously, who weren't gang members and who weren't practitioners of violent crime that are trying to get around in the world today in this country, but they are still distrustful because of the habits that they developed during the time in the war zone. Um, so that's changing, and but the thing is, the most optimistic people, the ones that are able to go out there and share value and trade and work for the future, they're being rewarded simply by not being subjugated. And
mhm.
that is a profound change in culture. And I think in the West, that level of trust and belief in your fellow man to be able to trade with them is not gone, but it's deteriorating in its own way, but not because they're in a war zone, but because the power of the state has infected the culture and behavior on such a profound level that it changes these kinds of relationships.
Right.
That's
And
pretty heavy.
yeah, and y'all kind of seeing this real time play out in your own backyard. What is that like? Because we just hear about it, and we hear a lot of times. I think on especially Bitcoin Twitter, you get in these echo chambers that are digital that you're accessing from your couch, and you're not getting out and actually seeing the real change take place out in the physical world like y'all are. But I mean, y'all, it's happening real time around y'all. What is that like?
It
That's
is.
a really great. Sorry to interrupt, but that's a really great observation that there is a difference between people who get their knowledge about what's happening outside their echo chamber, but through social media. And I'll give you an example of this. Recently, um, the president here, Nayib Bukele, uh, tweeted out a what appeared to be a dictate to the supermarkets here to lower their food prices. And naturally, many of the people in the Bitcoin community uh, were condemnatory toward this. And it makes sense that they would be because what they're getting is the tweet, the headline, the the top part of the action, the announcement of the action, but they don't get the full context. And the full context is that, again, we're in a war zone, and the country was in a war zone for an extended period of time. There was no supply chain here to speak of and the only supply chain that was here were operated by people who could thrive in a war zone, which means gang members, mobsters, really. And so those chains still exist in the country, and they're effectively monopolies that are emerging from this situation. And I don't mean that in terms of a competitive monopoly, a business that has succeeded so well that the competition pales by example. I mean a monopoly that was enforced through an extended period of violence. So
it can actually be called a cartel. It's a
a cartel. Absolutely. Yeah, it is a cartel. And I think Bukele named it as such. So what everyone got from this tweet was that the government here was going to clamp down on the food producers, the supply chain managers, the supermarkets, and enforce price controls. And what actually happened is that he gave farmers markets much more visibility and encouraged them to operate without regulatory barriers. And now the farmers markets are going to basically eliminate the middleman function that the cartels operated under here. Just by encouraging that kind of economic behavior, that was the solution. But everyone got all up in arms about the hint of price controls without knowing the full context, without knowing the history. And that's where we are. So you kind of nailed the phenomenon of only being in your own echo chamber and then only consuming news that gives you a partial sliver of the truth.
Right. And that's why before we started the live part, we were talking about how important it is to have decentralized media where you can actually drill down and find people on the front line that are living in those countries. And you can actually find content like y'all are providing today of people that are kind of boots on the ground and can tell you from an El Salvadorian standpoint what's going on in El Salvador. Just, because some of these tweets are just just information. It's kind of like that game you play, telephone, where you just down, and by the time it gets to your eyes, who knows what the original statement or thought was.
I actually do that when I teach anthropology. We would play telephone because we would have these discussions about, how things change, and it depends on perception, worldview, all of these things. But even if following people that are down here, boots on the ground, you have to find out. And, I'm a teacher. I teach history. I teach writing. I teach literature. And context is so important. And whenever I'm teaching, and I encourage primary sources on our website for the book, we have tons of primary sources that I used in the book, and I'm adding it to it. And it's all about the history of money and Bitcoin. So if anybody wants to go and find a source, say, hey, I want to read about, the legislation of when the Fed came in, or the legislation on the Banking Act, or 6102, what did the actual legislation say? They can go to our website now and they can click on a link and they can find that. So that is so important. So, but in doing that, particularly when you're reading sources where somebody's writing, even in that time period, a great example is Suetonius, who was a Roman writer, writing about the emperors. And he was basically writing a tabloid. It's wonderfully entertaining to read, but you have to kind of know his background and what his purpose was to write. And that purpose is really important. And there are some people on Twitter that are down here, and I read their tweets, and I'm like, you're no better than, the colonialists that came in and wanted everything to be just like it was where you were. It's not, and it really makes me angry because you come down here and you now, like, this is kind of Galt's Gulch for Joel and I, if you're familiar with Atlas Shrugged. This is our safe haven. We left America because I am such a patriot and tied to the founding of our country that I couldn't stay there anymore. And I found this place. And so I am so excited to be here and live in a place where you see freedom is valued and it's actually on the rise as opposed to it being on the decline, like I see it is in America. And so, but then you get people down here and like, well, my roof leaked. Oh my goodness. This is a third world, I hate to use that term, but, a developing country, I guess, is more PC. But and they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have, and they're, like Joel said, coming out of decades of war. They don't have trained engineers. And I mean, they do, but not at the capacity that you would have in America. They don't have all the electricians with the experience. I mean, you're a master electrician. You have people that can do it, but it's not at the same sort of level and skill. And even getting stuff this is a tiny country. Everything is imported. And the imports have been taken over by cartels for decades, and they still are trying to figure that out. So
I should add that our friends are complaining about their roof leaking. They are, because their roof is leaking, but they're not.
But they're not posting it on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, be careful when you rent a house, or like,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. Like, it's so much negativity, and I get so angry. But me, with my sort of Molly manners, I try to not engage on Twitter and attack somebody back. But I'm really starting to. There's a couple accounts in particular that I want to start pushing back on.
I know who you're talking about too.
Yeah, and it's easy for, I think, the human mind to focus on what you don't have, what's a threat, what's dangerous. I think that's part of our survival mechanism that's deep in our genetic makeup. It's how we've been passed. It's how our genetic code has been safely passed to us.
Right. It's the fight or flight, right? We have to survive. Right. But then I think about, what is the purpose of this person's account? And he's trying to monetize his social media. And we all know what monetizes social media. It's going to be that inflammatory stuff, right? People like, and they can get behind it. So that's why I don't engage also, is I'm not going to try to help him on his monetization either. So I'm holding my moral ground.
That's right. Whatever you pour energy into, that's what grows. And so if the more energy and attention you give the fear side, that's what grows, rather than the opportunity and what could be. And so I'm a firm believer, you either live for a vision of the future that you want to create, or you live in this constant fear of what could happen or what has happened. And it's a tough cycle to break.
It is. So I'll just huff, and then I'll go, ride around on my Ted Lasso believe pool float in our pool and just shake it off.
That's right. That's right. So why don't y'all tell us about would y'all rather start telling us maybe your background a little more about how you maybe made your journey to El Salvador? And then we
can do that. And that'll actually lead into the book quite well. So we're coming up on a couple of weeks from our 1-year anniversary of living here full time. But it was last spring. And okay, let me back up. We were living in Seattle through the pandemic, and it was one of the worst places to be. There were worse places in America to be, but it was really bad. We were on lockdown. We couldn't even have our friends visit us, because probably our neighbors would tell on us, and then we would get in trouble because we had people, and we were, had people in our home.
And I would say that I never in my life thought I would meet people who would have given Anne Frank up to the Nazis until we went through lockdown. I know these people now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
absolutely.
People walking outside by themselves, fully masked up, the fear in people's eyes when they looked at you, like humans were disease vectors. We were no longer humans. It was one of the most vile things that I've witnessed in my lifetime, is how people were treating each other. And it's still, those scars still run pretty deep, even though we're down here. So in 2021, we moved to Florida, but we did talk about possibly moving down here. And I wasn't ready yet. I don't know if Joel would have been ready, but you probably would have been more open to it. Because I'm a classicist. I've always had this romantic idea of moving to Europe, and I love Western Civ. It's what I focus on in my teachings. All the great books, ideas, history, art history of the West. And I always thought moving to Europe, that's been my dream since I was probably 6 years old when we had a French exchange student. I've always wanted to move there. And so moving to El Salvador, I was like, it's not Europe. And if I'm going to live abroad, that's where I'm going to live. And I was pretty set in that mindset. And then last year, and whether you like Trump or not, and I know everybody in this room's opinion, but my family goes, I'm a card-carrying member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. My family ancestors came over on the Mayflower. I go way back in American history on one side of my family. I could have DAR membership on both sides. So with what was happening in America, and I see us getting further and further away from the Constitution, I was just like, I can't, this is so hard on me.
And what you're talking about specifically is the Alvin Gregg, the DA of New York City, leveling charges and indicting Trump. That happened in 2023.
Absolutely. And being, a Roman historian, and studying the fall of Rome in a great deal, I was like, I can't watch this place that I love the ideas in which it was founded on crumble and decline. So last spring, when that indictment came out, the next day I said, Joel, we're out of here. We're moving to El Salvador. And we started selling everything.
And can you explain why that's so important? Because a lot of people don't understand, and even I don't understand, like, what are they doing to Trump that has nothing really to do with Trump and everything to do that this kind of stuff shouldn't happen in our country?
And just to be very clear about this, neither Deanna or I are Trump supporters. In fact, I think that he's a vile human being. Let's not mince words about this, and who's led the Republican Party astray. But nevertheless, this is a landmark moment in American political history, and Deanna has specific reasons for this.
So, I study history. I know American history, and you've had a lot. I mean, there have literally been fist fights in the houses of Congress in the history, right? I know about the Lincoln Douglas debates. I've read them. I'm a primary source junkie. I go to the source. I look at the documents. I think everybody on the planet needs to read Frederick Douglass's autobiography to understand how to treat another human being. Like, I have very strong conviction in what is moral and what is immoral. And the fact that I know our Constitution, and I know the Declaration of Independence. I know the America's Creed. I've studied this. I've read tons of secondary sources and primary sources. And when they start going after political enemies for that reason, it is no longer the republic in which it was founded. America is not a democracy. And when people call it a democracy, I have this visceral reaction and my hand fists up, and I'm a nonviolent person. It is not a democracy. It is a republic based on the Republican system, as well as a lot of ideas that came after that. The founding fathers knew their stuff.
Let's just define our terms here. By republic, you mean a form of government, specifically with a constitution that restricts government action. Absolutely. Rather than a full-scale democracy in which it's full mob rule.
Absolutely. So democracy, everyone say matters, and you can get mob rule. In Bitcoin, we call that a 51% attack, right? And so when they went after him, the way that they did, it was a political move. And I'm like, this is no longer America, and I'm out. It is a banana republic, and I'm done. And, it hurts, and I'm still devastated. And there are days that it's very hard on me still, even though I left. And I know everybody says you have to stay and fight. And I get that 100%. I can't do it. It's too far gone. I've studied enough history. I studied the fall of Rome. It's not coming back. And I admire those who have that hope and belief. It's not ever going to be what it was. In following those founding ideals, they're gone. So I went to a place where I saw somebody who was a ruler, and everybody's like, oh, he's draconian or he's a dictator. And I'm like, okay, but you know what? He cleaned up his country. And what about everybody who's in prison, right? All those gang members who were raping and who were kidnapping and who were extorting, and people were literally could not leave their home, and kids could be snatched up or brought into the gangs to be like drug runners, I don't feel bad for them. That's on them. And the fact that they're locked up, good on somebody locking those people up, because every honest citizen in this country is now free.
The difference between El Salvador on that level and the rest of Latin America is that every other country would empty their jail cells and send them to the Texas border. But in El Salvador, they locked up their criminals and they have a huge maximum security facility in which they send them to. And a lot of people will question whether there's due process involved. And the thing is that, again, when you are in a war zone, there's a lot of emergency situations that need to be addressed. However, their emergencies are by definition not permanent. So you fix the emergency and then you figure out how to fix your fixes after the emergency ends. So what we can feel confident about is what not just that they locked up the criminals, but what are the redresses that they've used to fix the excesses. And we've seen that there people are let out of the jails if there's proof that of no wrongdoing. For example, maybe they were just put into the jail because they had some tattoos. Okay, that's, when you have thousands of criminals that you have to lock up and the tattoos are the ones that distinguish the gang members, then those are the people that you lock up and there's no time to do the due process, but you fix it afterwards. And that's what we've seen happen here.
Yeah. And
the number I heard was that there were around 600,000 arrests, but you have around 70 or 80,000 in prison. So
yeah, it's around 70,000 right now, last I knew, but it could have come up. Yeah.
There's also a program here that we've just heard about in which the nonviolent offenders, the ones who weren't behind, even the planners, the organizers of the gangs, the ones who were drawn into the gang network, the lookouts, the ones who were family members who tried to protect their gang member families, they were imprisoned as well, but there is a path to redemption for them. So they're actually putting them to work rebuilding the infrastructure, because there is an objective crime that was done. So there is restitution that needs to be paid, a debt to society, if you will. And then once that debt is repaid, then the path to retribution is, or the path to redemption is complete, and they'll be allowed back into society. But the ones who are the violent offenders, the ones who are beyond redemption, there's no path for them. So that's these in our Western world, what we've gotten used to is the idea of mercy over justice. And here that that relationship is more skewed on the side of justice.
It's true. And, like the justice system in America, you see what the penalties are for the crime. And, a rapist is getting out in 12 months on good behavior. I'm sorry.
And the person who defends themselves against rape is the one that gets imprisoned.
Yeah.
And we've seen that actually happen in Germany. There's a case of a young teenager who defended herself with pepper spray. Her assailants were let go immediately, and she was put in jail.
Wow.
And it's not just, this is what's happening in the West, right? And so I'm out. I don't want to stay there anymore. It's not where I want to spend my life. I want to be a happy, productive citizen somewhere that I align with values. And yeah, you can stay and fight, but I no longer believe that it's going to go back. And I've seen the decline over the 20th century, and writing this book, I did deep dive into economics that I've never done because I'm a cultural historian. So art, literature, what I call the pretty parts of history. I was a full-time humanities professor. I talked about economics. I talked about the wars in the context of those things, of humanities, but I didn't focus it. I'm not a military historian. Like when you study history, you tend to kind of silo. And I'm a generalist because I taught Western Civ. But in my own research, I studied religion, Christianity. I studied particularly burial practices. I studied art history. And so I've had to learn a lot in writing this book about particularly the 20th century because I'm a class, I studied ancient through the Renaissance and even to the Enlightenment. I know philosophy, I know history, but I don't, and I knew, the economics, but I never did the deep dive in the modern world. And that, oh my gosh, if I wasn't a Bitcoiner before I wrote this book, I don't see how I couldn't be at this point. It was
I have
frightening, eye-opening for me.
So a question I have for y'all then is, it seems that we are frustrated with corruption in the physical world, and now we're faced with something that's incorruptible in the digital world that can store energy from the physical world. And I'm wondering how this, as energy just gets sucked out of the physical world, which seems to be held by corrupted governments, people, institutions, what does this do to these governments that maybe are corrupted when they no longer can capture our energy because we're storing it in something that's ours, we can actually own, we can take custody of it, and now no longer participate by a dilution of our assets. So it's kind of like we work so hard to get these assets, they then steal half its purchasing power and do terrible things with it, and now we've got this mechanism that can just rug pull all that energy back under our control and all future energy back under our control. And I'm wondering what that does to their ability to even hurt us as a species.
We're seeing that play out right now, right? They're trying to regulate it. And there's this even, the United States is a federalist system. We have states and states' rights within a federal system. And so you see states that are trying to lock down rights for their individuals. They're trying to protect, but on the federal level, I mean, look, Germany's selling all of their, not all, but they're selling a great deal of Bitcoin right now. How stupid is that? The United States is selling tons of Bitcoin over and over again. They want to control. I mean, this is 1984 playing out, and I teach that novel, and I've taught it for years, where they want to hold control, and they will do everything they can to keep it, which is why those people putting so much faith into Trump, I mean, you've got to look at his history. He says one thing and he does another. He's a politician. He wants to get elected. And, and that's my issue with trust, particularly in the American system. So as my dad would say, I'm just going to hide and watch from El Salvador and see how it plays out. But I don't see him doing all of these things he's claiming to be. He's getting votes, in my opinion.
I'd like to just use a historical example from the book, and the book title, I think, describes like the big picture, what we were trying to accomplish in writing it. The title of the book is called Shells to Satoshi, and then subtitle is the rise, or the story of money and the rise of Bitcoin. So really what this is a big picture of money's impact throughout history, what its purpose was from its very early beginnings to what we all here would think is the perfect form of money in Bitcoin. So that's why it was called Shells to Satoshi. But to address your point, though, and this is the historical example I wanted to point out to, in one of the chapters of our book, we talk about Renaissance Florence and the rise of the Medici family, the banking family. And in this era, it emerged out of a period of time that we, and obviously we're talking about centuries of emergence, but it emerged from a period of time that many historians might call the Dark Ages, but Deanna might have problems with that terminology.
We
But
can say the Middle Ages.
Yeah, we can call it the Middle Ages. But the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, had a firm grip on control in humanity's life and culture. So, but out of this, in Florence, emerged a banking family that was able to create a a form of money, but really what they did is advance the idea of using credit to promote trade and economic relationships in a more complex way. Prior to this advance, trade had to happen on a much more local level. If you created something, it was much more difficult to trade it across great distances, which may have had goods that were very valuable because of their rarity, spices from the Orient, for example. And it was a little harder to create those ongoing relationships because you had to transport heavy gold or paper money that may or may not be redeemable in the distant location, but could also be easily counterfeited. So it was a very difficult thing to promote those kinds of relationships across great distances. And what the Medici were able to do through some amazing economic innovations, they were able to establish a system of trust and credit that spanned across geography because they were able to open up branches of their organization in some of the great trading cities in Europe at the time. So instead of having to transport gold to get the thing that you wanted to trade for, you could just use a letter of credit from the Medici Bank that would be redeemable at that distant location. So you were actually transporting value in a very almost instantaneous way that was unprecedented. And one of the ways that they were able to do this is because they established relationships with the Catholic Church that allowed them to get around a lot of the usury laws that they had in place. A lot of the it's the equivalent of our modern regulatory state, where there were so many regulations on behavior that they were able to skirt because of the relationships they had and the prestige that they had. And this created an enormous amount of production and value and a flowering of creation and ideas and art that, now the term Renaissance is just synonymous with the idea of a great rebirth. And that was a monetary invention, which also coincided with many ideological and philosophical innovations. But for this to happen, you had to have these innovations that allowed for the value transfer and the complexity of the trade relationships to take place. And it's a brilliant, beautiful thing, which we can see is happening in the Bitcoin world today. The great power of Bitcoin to foster more complex economic relationships that skirt the prevailing authority, to me, is very similar to how the Medici were able to do the same thing in their era, and the result of that was a flowering of culture. And I think we could have the same thing today, using Bitcoin as the hub of value creation. So that was a long way around of answering your question, but
Well,
that's what I think.
I have a follow-up question then, for the record. Can y'all explain, because I don't think it's explained enough and it's just glossed over, but could you please, maybe in a fifth grade level, explain why peer-to-peer permissionless is so critical to a lot of things you just explained?
Do you want to take that, Joel?
Yeah. So there's a 30,000 foot level version of that answer and a ground floor sea level version of that answer. So the sea level view is that peer-to-peer relationships allow for no barriers to take place between economic actors. And barriers cause friction, and sometimes friction can be so powerful that the economic relationship never takes place. So the value never gets created in the first place, and it's it's an economic phenomenon that that we don't think about in our daily lives because we never see the value not get created. The It's called opportunity cost. The idea that if something keeps the economic relationship from happening, then you never see what didn't get created. And so peer-to-peer relationships on a very basic level allow those relationships to happen without friction. It can just happen, and we don't need an intermediary. I mean, Bitcoin's the intermediary, but we don't need a bank. We don't need to wire money. We don't need to go through several regulatory hurdles. We just do it, and so that's the most basic, concrete way that it affects trade and causes value to be created like it would never have with the frictions involved.
I have also another answer to that in terms of the creativity. So I was a curator at a museum. I know a lot of artists. And so when artists are pricing their work, they have to put in a whole bunch of extra cost because they have to cover their taxes. They have to cover these things, right? So you're looking at like 20 to 40%, depending on the level of the artist or whatever, increase on price. So peer-to-peer also helps with pricing, right? If you're doing, that, and okay, yeah, in some jurisdictions, you're, the claiming and the tax, and this is not tax advice or whatever, but if think about a world where Bitcoin, and we don't have any of these tax regulations anymore, right? It's just Bitcoiners dealing with Bitcoiners. And as humans, the only way that we, show our value is through our time, energy, and ideas. So think about having time, energy, and ideas without having to pay a percentage of that automatically off the top to some agency, whether you agree with it or not. Now, in the Middle Ages that we were talking about, even in the Renaissance, there's been taxation and census and all these things going back to ancient Rome and Greece. However, you could hire an artist to paint a portrait or, put a painting or do a fresco in a church because that's how you're going to get into heaven. The Renaissance the Catholic Church in the Renaissance was quite corrupt, and you could buy your way into heaven. So that's what these rich families were doing. They would pay an artist, and that artist would not have to worry about saying, okay, I've got to pay my taxes and I've got to do this when they're pricing it out. So you can learn what your actual value as a human being with your time, energy, and ideas is with peer-to-peer. That's remarkable. And the market will set what that is. We have a Bitcoin farmers market every 2 weeks. Joel and I try to live as much as we can on the Bitcoin standard down here. Yet last night we got our raw milk, and it's not a problem to get raw milk and cream. I make my half and half for my coffee every week. We get cheese that's made from raw milk. We get butter. We buy produce. We get great sourdough bread. So these are all the things, and we're paying Bitcoin. We get grass-fed beef. We get really high-quality pork, all paid with Bitcoin. And we also we got grass-fed beef from farmers markets in the United States. And it is probably a third to half the cost down here because you don't have all of that regulatory muck on top of it. We're on the dollar standard. Dollar is the currency down here. So it's not that, our currency and everything is so much cheaper. We have Walmart down here. We have the equivalent of Costco down here. We pay sometimes American prices or more depending on what we're buying. Very few things are cheaper down here, honestly. So, but the fact that we're living peer-to-peer in the Bitcoin farmers market, we can pay and we pay for the raw cream. We can pay these prices that are affordable.
And let me just expand the view a little bit to in the definition of what peer-to-peer means. I mean, Deanna described really well personal interactions where we look the person that we want to buy something from right in the eye, and we can see where our stuff is coming from, and that's great. It's a personal peer-to-peer, literally peer-to-peer relationship. But peer-to-peer on a Bitcoin standard is not simply limited to the local level. it means that you can expand your market to the world. And so, over the past couple, well, not too far away, not more than a few decades, but we've had, maybe even in the last decade, we've seen the explosion of people looking to make a few extra bucks on the side. So they'll get into crafting, or they'll build stuff and they'll sell it on Etsy or eBay. And but that's the intermediary. I mean, it seems like a peer-to-peer relationship where you have someone creating something and having the entire market be their world. And that seems like a peer-to-peer relationship, but what it actually is using these platforms as an intermediary who have their own hurdles that you have to jump through, and that those hurdles are getting higher and higher every day because the centralized systems are really actively and indirectly trying to shut them down. So because peer-to-peer relationships, no matter how big or small, are threats to centralized institutions. So, and so, if you look historically at the history of peer-to-peer relationships, what you'll see is that um, when certain monetary forms like gold and silver and even shells were the medium of exchange, the exchanges would take place between the parties that were trading directly and in person. And with the rise of banks, um, those relationships had an intermediary posed between them, which it greatly expanded the possibilities, allowed you to make relationships across great distances and so on without filling your ship's hold with gold that could go get lost at sea. So, so the intermediaries made those relationships possible. But the thing that they also created at the same time was the possibility of corruption. So, in order to be the intermediary, you had to trust them. So, for many centuries, the trust was fairly given, and people were able to have those relationships, and it worked. But at a certain point, the corruption was too tempting for the people who ran the centralized institutions like banks, and the rise of central banks, even though it made really complex and very valuable trade relationships possible. The trust level was not something that was verifiable. It was completely opaque, and the institution that operated on that trust was just simply an authority. You had to trust them in order to have this kind of a market. And this is the 30,000 foot level view of how valuable Bitcoin was. Now you have an actual electronic, instantly transportable currency that is trustless and has no real barriers to entry except for knowledge. And now these relationships can again begin to flourish without having authoritative intermediaries that can't be trusted. That is the real big picture value of Bitcoin. And it's hard to see unless you can look back at the history, which fortunately we've done with our book.
You know, one thing I'm learning from Lynn Alden's book is before there was money, there was ledgers, and that if you owe someone a favor, there might not be money involved. It's just they did your chores for the day. They have this, she gives this example early in the book about two children that have to do chores every day. One of them wants to go spend a night at a friend's house, so she negotiates with her brother to do her chores for that day. And it's a mental ledger. It's not written down, but that the more complex the favors get, you may have to start writing them down, and then the more people are involved. And so that the earliest some of the earliest things we found, and maybe Deanna, you can speak on this, were actually ledgers of who
Yeah.
owed.
We talk about the same thing. We even use the term mental ledger in the book, and how it arose out of barter level societies. And Deanna can definitely speak to it from an anthropological level, which was our approach in the book.
Yeah, so there is a society in Africa in the Kalahari Desert that were still living on a barter system up until the mid 20th century. And so we put an example of them in the book, and it's it's a glottal stop, so it's a little exclamation point, but it's pronounced the Kung people of Africa of the Kalahari, and they had these mental ledgers. And the thing with these mental ledgers, and you hit it on the head there, the nail on the head there, Craig, is with complexity. When you have little band and even tribe level societies where typically they're familial or family units that, they follow the patriarch or the father, or maybe the best hunter, and you have groups like under 100 people, and everybody knows everybody, and there's a sort of this intimate knowledge of everybody that's related, or that this is my tribe, that's your tribe, but there's trust because and there's sort of social mores. You don't have to have these complex laws written down. We don't see that until we get to the state level societies with early Mesopotamia. And so social mores, when there's only 100 people and you get ostracized and you're by yourself and you are just trying to get enough calories to survive, so these are hunter-gatherers, then that means something. So those kind of enforcements really mean something in these small societies. And so you can have these mental ledgers. But the minute you start getting into what we call like horticulturalists, where it's more complex, you start having part-time agriculture where you're controlling and you're planting intentional seeds where the produce was larger, so you save seeds from maybe that stalk of corn. And that's why we go from maize being like an inch long to the corn that we have at the supermarket today. That happens over time. So when you get to those levels, or the pastoralists who are herders, you can't keep mental ledgers because it's too complex. And then when you get to state level societies, which the first state level societies were about 8,000 or so years ago, you start having specialization. So now all you do is make shoes. All you do is farm. All you do is raise goats. All you do is make pots. Well, if all you do is make pots and you need food, you're going to have to go to the farmer or the herder. And it gets really complex because I have a pot that I'm selling and you need that to cook, but you are selling an entire bushel of grain. Maybe that's worth more, or maybe that's worth less. And so you can't keep these mental ledgers anymore. And so in Mesopotamia, we have cuneiform, and I won't give a total history lesson on. I've had my students make cuneiform tablets in class. It's a really fun activity, but I won't do that today. But it's the first, some of the first writing, and all it is transactions. The first writings we have is transactions. And we have that in the archaeological record. And we have many of them have been translated. And again, I could bore you with so much history. I've taught classes just on Mesopotamia. I love Mesopotamia and all the civilizations that come out of it. But that's the first written records on the planet aren't great stories. It's not great literature. It's like, hey, that guy owes me a cow. And that's really, really interesting. I
don't think it's well understood how important permissionless is, because we don't really see the permissions we had to seek. But I recently opened up another business, and I've started, over a dozen businesses in my whole career, but this one, of course, was Bitcoin related. And I had to go to the Secretary of State of Louisiana. I had to get an EIN. I had to have my ID already verified, a driver's license with the state of Louisiana. I had to show up with these credentials at the bank. The bank is not going to give me a bank account unless they can confirm that I've sought the permission with proper documentation of the state of Louisiana, the U.S. government, and the identification that goes with it. And then they want my home address, again, seeking more permission. They want my email address, my phone number. They're seeking AT&T's permission. It's just got to have a phone number. How can we track him down? And then I have this big questionnaire, and I have to sign everything. And so exiting that bank a couple months ago, now in this conversation with y'all, I'm like, I had to seek a lot of permission just to start being able to receive US dollars. And then from that moment forward, that institution is monitoring me and all the people I do business with.
Yeah.
As a third party can come in and say, hey, you're not doing business according to all the people that we're monitoring you for, and therefore we're going to shut your whole economy down until you can get back within the boundaries of how we think you want to act. And so if the power that wields over all of your efforts and all of your clients and all of your invoices and revenue that you generate from that moment forward is immense, they can just literally shut you down. Now with Bitcoin, it is permissionless. If you just get the wallet address and you have a wallet, when you press send, Bitcoin's not thinking, I wonder if did he pay his taxes this year? Did he vote for the right person this year? Is he old enough to do this transaction? Because we only allow if you're 18 years old.
Yeah.
A 5-year-old can send money to China from Africa and Bitcoin doesn't care. If you've got the right wallet address, it's going. And that's just such a powerful tool. Because before, if your enemy had the ear of the people giving out permissions, you could be shut down completely. And that had to be used throughout history in trade.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen look at America. I have a background. Well, Joel and I have started and shut down several businesses in the States. So we get it 100%. And I did all of our accounting. We had an accountant, but I had to gather and I had to keep records and everything and, do all the spreadsheets. It is a nightmare. Joel doesn't talk to me during tax season because I am not nice. And I try to be a really good human being most of the time. But there are certain things like doing US taxes, which, by the way, we still have to do. We're one of 2 countries in the world, being Americans, that we still have to pay our taxes every year to the state, to the government, even though we don't live there.
Wow.
Don't get me started. So this year, once again, I was not a nice person through several weeks between March and April. And I was actually it's probably worse this year because I was so mad about having to do it from El Salvador.
Wow.
No comment.
Is there a way that can be completely wiped out? Like, do you have to renounce your citizenship?
Yep.
That whole process and then become an official citizen of somewhere else?
Absolutely. That's the only way we escape Uncle Sam's thumb.
Wow.
And I mean, if you really think about how easy it is to just be a wage slave, go to the office, clock in or clock out, or just be on salary, everything's taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about like if that's all you get your income from, then at the end of the year you just file your paperwork. You don't even have to worry about paying your taxes on a quarterly basis. Everything's withdrawn from your paycheck automatically. It's so much easier. And I don't think we ever really give enough thought to how much the incentives are placed maintaining the ease of living a thoughtless life, and to and how the so many barriers are put into place for active-minded people who want to make their own way and control their own destiny. And when we really think about how the incentives are put into place, I'm not going to say that there is a Dr. Evil character behind the scenes, petting his hairless cat and planning how to subjugate people. I don't think there's any one person that does it. It just, all the incentives are placed in this fiat system to make that happen, to put the barriers to people who want to be independent and to remove them and take care of everything for the people who are thoughtless. So, and that's the world we live in, but that's where Bitcoin comes in, because it allows you to live a life outside of that system.
Yeah, and we often push. I remember when I got into Bitcoin and I was surrounded by some early Bitcoiners, I would often ask them, can I just give you money and you hold it for me? And I know it was my laziness inside that just didn't want the responsibility. And I was so used to being cared for and looked after by my banks and governments and whoever else. But oftentimes the Bitcoiners would say, no, you have to learn this. I don't want this responsibility. And kudos to them. And I like that part of our culture is very rarely do you hear somebody say that, they've got everybody's Bitcoin in their local circle. If anything, they're teaching them how to hold their own Bitcoin, which I think is necessary. And I think mostly it's just for lazy reasons in the early days that we don't want to have to learn how to do all these things that would get us independent of all these things that we're talking about.
Craig, there is a deep philosophical reason at the heart of that, which I'm sure we can explore on your show on Sundays. But the most basic choice that human beings have, and I know you've heard me say this on any number of the Bitcoin Daily shows, but the most fundamental choice that any individual human being can make is to think or not to think. You can either put your mind in focus, apprehend what you see in front of you with your five senses, and try to integrate that and form it into a concept that you can hold. That is a process that it entails a choice that you make. And the alternative to that choice is to not do anything but let your mind go out of focus and just let things pass you by. And you're basically just you're just floating without having any kind of individual action that you're doing. Now, if you take that basic choice and you apply it to this world, you can see the people that are attracted to Bitcoin are doing so for a reason. They're the ones who are actively living their lives, and they know that it's important to have proof of work to your own first-handed active effort into apprehending information and truth. And it's a process that you have to go through versus the ones that feel more comfortable in a fiat world where everything's taken care of you and you don't really have to think much because it's a burden to you. So I'm sure on your Sunday show, we will talk about this in length at some future date, but that's the fundamental choice. And I think it's important to recognize that Bitcoin appeals to the former and not the latter.
Yeah. And I think the medicine to that is, being rich is hard, being poor is hard. Choose your hard. And you can go down the list of, being out of shape is hard, being in shape is hard. Either way, it's going to be hard. So not knowing about Bitcoin is very hard. Knowing about Bitcoin is hard. But it's a question of, do you want to be free and deal with the elements of freedom, or do you want to be in a cage and be ruled by others? They're both hard lives, really.
It is. So the first time I read Atlas Shrugged coincides with me getting my doctorate degree in education. So here I am reading Atlas Shrugged, and I'm trying to fight a corrupt system from within, which is another reason why it was easy for me to leave the States last year, is that I was already in a corrupt system, that I had that hope and optimism that, okay, at the college I was working at, they wanted me to apply to be a dean. And I was like, great, now, and I'd already started to be ostracized. I was very active in campus and statewide politics in California for the community college system. And so I was already ostracized from the curriculum committee on the statewide level. I had professors at my college that kind of, looked at me. I actually had to hide the fact that I was teaching excerpts from Ayn Rand or Anthem by Ayn Rand in my office. I had to hide those books because if my colleagues came in and saw them, it wasn't okay. And so,
the choice that you made there, the conflict that you had, should I stay and fight or should I exit the system, is exactly the conflict faced by the heroine of the novel for anyone who hasn't read it. So that's the parallel is really profound.
So I was getting my degree, and so I would, I'm a reader. I always have a book with me or a Kindle or something. I always have something to read with me, just that person. Even at meetups, I'm like, Joel, I can't people anymore. I'm going to go in the corner and read for a few minutes, and then I'll come back. I'm an introvert. So I have Atlas Shrugged, and I'm reading it, and this program was for people who were already working in education, and it was an educational leadership program. And just the glances I got. But even on my campus, I would question things about policies or how they were going to spend money. I was on the academic senate. I was curriculum chair. I was distance education coordinator. I mean, I was really active in campus community, and I started seeing people starting to kind of raise eyebrows or, push back or insinuate that I was racist because I questioned a program where they wanted to put money for what was 8% of our population, but if they put it towards another program, that would be like 60% of our population. I was like, why can't we help more people instead of just one small group of people? If you want to, do that. And there's, it was just really awful. And so I got my doctorate in 2016, and by spring of 2017, I resigned. And we were moving to Seattle to get out of LA because theoretically Joel's from there and we could have lower living expenses. It didn't work out that way, but lesson learned. I became a homeschool advocate, opened up a homeschool curriculum company based on the classics and the great books, did that for a few years, and we moved to Florida. So in all of that, I'm reading Atlas Shrugged and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And it was a very emotional experience for me because my eyes were opening and opening and opening. And I had always been a lover of freedom and our Constitution, but I was still idealistic. I still had these sort of rose-colored glasses on that I could fix this system that was broken from within. And when I read Atlas Shrugged, I'm like, nope, I got to go. I'm out. You can't fight when it's that far gone.
Yeah, and that's I love that book. If anything, I even thought about at Nashville. We have this big Airbnb, maybe having a movie night where we watched that first movie that they had. I thought
don't do it. It's so bad. It's so astonishingly bad.
Yes, we need a good movie on that one. I wish we would get a.
I mean, you can hate watch it. I mean, if you want to hate watch it and then talk about how bad it is, that could be entertaining. Yeah. But oh my God, it's bad.
I do that in class with the 95 Pride and Prejudice. We hate watch it in class and talk about how it messed everything up.
No, you mean the 2000.
Oh yeah, the 2005.
Yeah, the 95 one is awesome.
The Keira Knightley one, whatever year that was. Sorry.
Robert Breedlove gave a good 30-minute excerpt where he read the Don Conio speech. I think the money speech.
The money speech. Yes.
I love it. Yeah. I probably listened to the money speech 100 times because I would listen to it on a run, and it was the perfect length of time for my run. And I would just listen to it over and over and over again to try to beat into my head.
Maybe I should read that one and animate it and post it online or something. What do you think?
Yes.
You should do what Tomer did.
Yes.
I'm getting ready to do like a 5-6 part series and just take 5-minute chunks, play the actual 5-minute, and then me and him just talk about what went on in there so we can really go deep into it. And there are so many times I wish people like y'all would take the money speech, have some background film to it, but then really go deep into what it's meat, because it's all red meat. Literally the whole speech is just red meat.
All right.
Hold on,
Joel. Let's do it.
Hold on. So you haven't talked about your background. I'm the educator, but Joel has some background in film.
Yes, that's true. The reason I moved to LA in 1996 is because I wanted to get into the film business. So I took a lot of classes. I went to film school. I actually did a bunch of short films, and I even directed theater. And I actually have credits on IMDb, not really creative credits. I worked as crew. I did what's called script supervising or managing continuity in a film for a couple of really dumb, low budget horror movies. So that's my background. So I'm in that creative space, and I've done those things. So
you're also right. I'm just trying.
Yes, I'm also right. Yes. So I had a career in tech for a while, and I am really kind of now reinventing myself as a writer. So
fantastic. Well,
yeah, that's my path.
Your first project. let's do an animation. And we actually know the creators of the they came on the show, the creators of the film on Tomer.
You the one with Tomer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which one was it? Was it Bitcoin is Beautiful, or was it one of the other ones?
I don't even remember. I would go straight to Cosmonaut. BT
Okay.
Cosmonaut. It was his.
Listeners, if you haven't watched any of Tomer Strolight's narrated short pieces, go out and search for it. Start with Bitcoin is Beautiful because it's glorious. It's really good.
Yeah, I was tearing up. We watched it over dinner, and I was verklempt by the end.
Okay, I'm ashamed to say I've not watched that one.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it's like 6 minutes long. Yeah,
it's short.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna listen to it as soon as we're done with here. But yeah, so and the thing is, it's so easy now in the right hands of an artist to create short films quickly. And really, the script's already written, but it would be great. I would love to see something good on the Money Speech.
Yeah. So Joel and I, we have when we were doing the curriculum company, we had a show on, or a regular YouTube channel, and we just called it Morning Coffee, where I would talk about a particular topic, but Joel did all of the production. And so, like, I would talk about the history of Halloween on Halloween, or I would talk about the importance of silent reading if you are, you have kids and you want to get them reading, or the, different things that you could do for homeschool families, but anybody who wanted to have a larger role in education for their own family, whether you can actually homeschool or not because of legalities or whatever. And so it was trying to support families in education and educating their children. But Joel did all of our production, and we have a video on there that we're actually going to release at some point. But it's the main video on our channel. And our channel is Passionate Homeschooler on YouTube. But that video he created, I still watch it, and I've seen it over 100 times, and I still get choked up. And that's the same level of sort of this beautiful optimism, wonderful storytelling that Tomer did in this video. And I was like, oh my gosh, that got me. Nothing gets me like hope and optimism, and doing it in a way that is pure. Instead of tearing something down, you're lifting everything up.
Right. I 100% agree. And it really, as long as it's a great story, I'll give you a great example. When I was little, and I really never have had a passion for reading. I'm an Audible learner. But one of the few books I read was The Hobbit. And it was because I saw the old cartoon that was just, you remember the old one? It was only like 30 minutes long. And I was just pulled into that story. And so finally, when I read that book in 8th grade, it's the only book I've read more than twice in my life. I've read that book probably 7 or 8 times. So what a great story, but it was compressed into a little 30-minute. The story was great, but the cartoon quality was terrible. But
look, this is what art can do for people. We can read a nonfiction book. You can read our book. You can get a sense of what it is that you're trying to learn more about in a way that will communicate the information. But what art will do, what art can do, is feed your soul and give you you'll have the information. You might be able to read a book on ethics and say, well, this is how the author says a human being should be, right? But if you read a book, you might be able to ask yourself, is this what Jean Valjean would do? What would Cyrano de Bergerac do in this situation? How could I act like my heroes? What would Captain America do in this situation I'm facing right now? That's what art can do. Like, not even just literary arts, but you go to Florence and look at Michelangelo's David, and you can look at the look in his eye, and you can say, well, if he can do this, if he can face down Goliath, maybe I can too. That's what art can do for you.
Or Bernini, and just see, oh, that's love.
Yeah. You got to throw the Bernini in there whenever anyone says Michelangelo.
It's later than Michelangelo, but oh my goodness, yeah.
We've had this this happens every time we talk about that era.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I think, well, that I've known I've seen by him was the Baldacelli in the middle of St. Peter's, that huge brass sculpture. I think it's still the
Yeah.
largest not brass, bronze.
Yep. Bernini. So I I don't know. I mean, I have a background in art history, obviously. So art and literature move me more than film, to be honest. So Joel's a film guy, I'm a book guy, and we have really fun conversations.
Yeah.
So we'll go see a movie that's an adaptation or something from history. Don't get us started. We will argue to the end of the earth on the movie 300. That he's like, it was based on a graphic novel. I'm like, but it is wrong in the history. I was yelling at the screen in the theater. So
yes,
if you listen to our show on Wednesday at 8:00 Eastern, if you listen to our show and you hear us talk, this is how we talk all the time.
I know
This is it's not just limited to the show.
We've had friends just stare at us when we're just like out at a pub or something and like, you're really interesting. And we kind of lean in like, yeah, that's because they don't understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to have y'all on the show. It was I'm so thankful that y'all are doing our 101 Wednesday, because it was something I just kind of spoke out into the world, and when y'all showed up, I just felt like it was a match made in heaven. So I've really enjoyed when I listen to y'all.
It's fun for us too. We love it.
I love it.
Yeah. So just a little plug for our book. It's called Shells to Satoshi, The Story of Money, The Rise of Bitcoin. The first 14 chapters are all about the history of money and the philosophy of money and how we look at money. And then the last 2 chapters plus the epilogue, we get to Bitcoin. And the epilogue is titled Bitcoin's Beacon for Freedom. And that's where we end, on a very sort of optimistic note too.
Yeah, it's really the story of money and how it gets invented and reinvented over and over again as societies get more complex. The money has to get more complex in order to allow the society to grow, or if it fails, then the society regresses. So it's that story, and finally leads to the conclusion that Bitcoin is the money of the future. We've looked at the past. We've seen the mistakes everyone made. Here's how Bitcoin can take us to the next level. So it's available. I mean, if you go to our website, shellstosatoshi.com, you'll see where to purchase it from there. We are still working on getting it up on Amazon because that is Amazon is not cooperating right now. Yes, right. And we're also working on a paperback version. It's only available in ebook version right now, but the paperback version will be coming soon. So that's where we are right now on July 12th.
Yeah, we'll also have an audiobook at some point too that Jill will be narrating.
Oh, I'd love that. So how do you get a paperback, hardback? When is that coming? I'm
hoping by the end of the month. It's just a little bit. I have to format the index. And so I'm working on formatting the index because you don't need an index in an ebook. And that's the part that's holding me up. And InDesign has a glitch with indexing. So I'm just working on that. But it should be done by the end of the month, I would imagine.
So maybe if we were to make it down to El Salvador, I could get a signed copy.
Absolutely. Come to Adopting Bitcoin in November in El Salvador.
That's the other thing we have to plug.
Joel and I are running the book corner. We'll be having fireside chats with various authors in the Bitcoin space. I'm very excited for that. It's mid-November. Adoptingbitcoin.org, and then check. There's different locations around the world. Click on El Salvador, and some of our friends here are helping to organize the major conference. We checked out the venue the other day, and it is gorgeous. It's this beautiful, peaceful, very zen place up in the hills right outside of San Salvador, in an area called Santa Tecla.
Yeah, I mean, if any of that sounds interesting to you, the conference itself is only a couple of days, but come down here for a week or more and check out why El Salvador is so vibrant and optimistic. We are not paid representatives of the El Salvador Chamber of Commerce, but we are fans. So
And there'll be events throughout the country. They'll be in the city, San Salvador. They'll be at Bitcoin Beach, Bitcoin Berlin, which is a great circular economy that's growing by leaps and bounds up in the mountains. And so if it's too hot at the beach, then just you can go to Berlin for the next day.
Yeah, unlike us all being paid representatives of Bitcoin, because the more Bitcoin succeeds, the wealth we get.
It's true.
We really want El Salvador to be the metaphor that we keep hearing is that El Salvador is going to be the next Singapore, but I really think that is selling it too short. What El Salvador could be is the next Renaissance Florence.
Yeah,
that's the real goal,
and that's what Bukele's trying to do, is to attract the creators of the world to come here and make El Salvador flourish like Florence did.
We talked to our friends who were organizing the conference, and I said, I would love for there to be an arts and cultural scene here that when you think of 1920s Paris, when Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Picasso were all running around just talking to each other in the cafes of Paris. This could be that. Why not? If this is the epicenter of finance, why can't it also be a center of arts patronage too?
And that's something that happens over time. And Alexandria was this great philosophical city. It thrived economically. It thrived. I mean, it was just massive. And we see that happen, that in history, in eras of history, there's like one main focal point. In the modern world, things are so interconnected. But I do think that, if things keep going, maybe someplace like El Salvador can really rise to be, that phoenix out of the ashes of what it was. So that's hopeful. That alone is reason to come down and check it out.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, El Salvador, I'm just looking it up. It's got 6 million people.
It's tiny. It's geographically very small, which is why, again, going back to what you're talking about, the prices of produce and how they're trying to regulate that after these grocery store cartels, is everything is imported here, which is why it's expensive, more expensive than other places in Central America.
There are farms here, and the soil in various areas is fertile. Some of it is, some of it isn't, because a lot of the farms here did use fiat farming techniques like pesticides and whatnot. So, but the land can be developed to be self-sustaining. It's just after you exit a war zone, you have to rebuild.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those, just as some comparison, I like to look at places like El Salvador as just like a city. If you look at an American city like Dallas, it's about 6 million people. El Salvador has about 75 billion in GDP. Dallas has about 400 billion in GDP. And so just like Dallas and Miami and some of these cities that I've like studied, any economy, any people can band together and say, we want to make this a robust economy. We want to make this place flourish. We want to make art flourish. And if the president of El Salvador could wield similar power to the mayor of Miami and really just make the decision to rally the troops around the population, and the city just takes off.
And that's what's happening, actually. I mean, people are coming here, a lot more tourism. There's a lot more opportunity than there was before. And it, the saying Rome wasn't built in a day. That's okay. But it's considering how fast things have turned around. His first term as president was to clean up the crime and to make his country safe for people to be able to leave their houses. This second term that he's on now is all about the economy. Let's fix these broken systems. And he's going after it, just like he did with the criminals. And which is something
that a mayor of an American town can't really do. I mean, they can clean up the streets, but they can't really change a lot of the economic and regulatory barriers, because of the American system is a federalist system with an overarching government. But here, when you have a party and leadership at the top driving policy, they can debate the terms of the policies that they want to implement, but immediately put it into action.
Yeah, there's a lot less there is a legislative body here. He does have ministers, which is kind of like the cabinet in America. And when he has ousted ministers for corruption, and it's happened several times in his. So if he's like, he finds somebody is doing something that is not on the up and up, he's like, he will boot them out. There's been a finance minister, an education minister, the minister of economy, the cultural minister. And he's just like, yeah, you're gone. We're getting someone else. You step in line or you're out. And that, for me, like, wow, that's impressive.
You want to refer to the Minister of Culture and how fast that person got booted?
No, it's all right.
Okay. No, the Minister of there was
speculation, and people have been putting 2 and 2 together, but there hasn't been a formal announcement. So I'll refrain.
Oh, all right. Okay.
I don't want to just talk conjecture here.
Okay.
Right.
Good point.
Well, thank y'all so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having us.
And I want to have y'all back, especially maybe I can do another one of these from El Salvador when I'm going to do my best to come visit during y'all's convention.
Oh my God, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I actually want to like host something here if enough of our, the Daily Show folk are able to come down, or maybe something, do a family dinner for all y'all. So just as an incentive.
I wonder if maybe we can talk about this offline, but maybe we could also live stream some of our fireside chats. We'll have to figure out the technology of it, but maybe we could live stream that over the Bitcoin Daily show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Space.
We'll try.
Yeah.
I know how to do it. All you need is give me a time. And if you've got a decent internet, upload speed is what's important, not download speed. Okay. And so if you've got a good upload speed and a camera, and then it's just a matter of setting up the lighting and the audio and stuff. But as far as all the streaming stuff, I've already got that bought, paid for. I pay the subscription.
Right on.
I'm not using it to its fullest capacity. I would love to have a lot of the show hosts doing stuff using the StreamYard software that I use, because that's just getting more bang for our buck and accomplishing the mission we're all after, which is just to get education, knowledge, good content out, boost the signal.
Well, I'd love to do a live stream on, help Bitcoiners figure out how to vet sources, because it's not something that's typically taught. You're just like, go do research. And a lot of people don't know. And I spend so much time on that, teaching my students, like, you have to, go down and see who wrote this. Any Billy Bob can have a website. Yeah. And you have to figure it out. And what is that? We're going back to that. What is that purpose of that writer writing that?
Well, y'all have my Calendly. I think it's infinite. You just set the appointment and I will show up and we'll live stream whatever you want.
Awesome. Deanna. I would love that.
Yeah.
That's my crusade. I want to educate the world on Bitcoin and just how to think.
We are on. So my crusade is to create the largest megaphone possible so that you can, when you speak, it's heard.
I love that. Well, thank you, Craig. This has been fun.
Yes.
Thank y'all.
Tons of fun. Love it. Thanks.
All right, guys. And I'll send y'all this video so y'all can repost it wherever y'all like.
Thanks.
All right. You have a great day. Thank y'all.
You too. Bye.